Behind the Scene with David Bedein, September 21st, 2023. New development today, which hasn't received any publicity whatsoever. I don't know who wants to keep it quiet or who doesn't want to keep it quiet. But Israel's right now conducting a very important negotiation with Saudi Arabia. So a negotiation which deals with normalization, which would involve a great economic consequences both for Israel and Saudi Arabia and the entire Middle East. Now, the question is whether this is going to be a peace process or not is what's being discussed. 30 years ago, when Israel began a negotiation with the Palestine Liberation Organization, and the PLO, which said they were going to have new textbooks and new education, never followed through, and that's been the root of one of the problems Israel faced with the PLO. Deja vu to today. What we found out today by discussing matters with the team of people in Israel who are conducting negotiations with the Saudis, they tell us very matter of fact that the Saudis do not intend to make any changes in the curriculum of their schools concerning Israel. They will make a curriculum, and they have actually made some very big changes about Judaism, Torah, things like that, and anti-Semitism. That's being changed. What's not being changed, however, is the Saudi basically war on Israel, which was declared in '48 and has continued ever since, and the delegitimation that the Saudis have towards Israel as a Jewish state, or that it should even exist. Now, Saudi Arabia is the number 10 funder of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which uses its $1.6 billion budget to preach what they call the right of return by force of arms. Saudi Arabia is not going to stop the funding of that entity called the Palestinian Authority through UNRWA. Not going to stop it. And that kind of delegitimates the process, which can no longer be called a peace process. It's certainly an economic process. But again, listening to what we heard today about the education system, and that the education system will not change, and Saudi Arabia will still be teaching children that the war is on, the war against Israel is on, and that's something which we have to take into account. So that's something which is very important. Now, I want to make sure that on this program we announce that on October 8th, 2023, 8 o'clock in Israel, in the evening in Israel, and 7 o'clock in Sweden, and wherever else, whatever else the time zone comes to, we're going to hold a conference called Holding UNRWA Accountable. UNRWA has been keeping refugees in refugee camps, in 59 refugee camps, since 1949. It comes to 6.4 million Arab refugees. They're actually, most of them are not refugees. They're descendants of refugees who are being taken care of there, and they're being taught what is the theme of their school system, the right of return by force of arms. This sounds like a very unusual focus for a school system. I mean, a school system, especially under the aegis of the UN. However, the school books are taken from the Palestine Liberation Organization, and the purpose of the school books, of course, is to foment revolution amongst the Arabs who live here, who live in the refugee camps, the 59 refugee camps, and so they're all taught that it's a temporary situation. The fact that Saudi Arabia has been the kingpin of the funding for the education system of the people, together with 20 other countries, which you can see on their site. We'll post it in a few minutes, so you can see exactly what we're talking about in terms of that development. Now, the other thing that happened today, on September 21st, 2023, was a meeting of the donor countries, the 67 donor nations that give money to UNRWA. And what we suggested was that what would be discussed amongst the 21 countries, the 20 main countries that give funds to UNRWA, is they start conditioning the funds on very basic principles of accountability, and, for example, to make sure that all the funds that are raised for health, education, and welfare actually get there. And in addition, a very important point, which is that UNRWA schools, which this past summer organized summer camps, violent summer camps, that they be checked for munitions and for guns, and to make sure that there's accountability for the schools being appropriate for students. Again, in the summer, one of the things we filmed, and I'm going to show the film after this program, was thousands of residents of the refugee camps patrolling the refugee camps and the schools of UNRWA with heavy weapons. Now, there's no question about it that they should be examined and they should be inspected, and it's inspected on an ongoing basis. There's no reason to give UNRWA a pass on this. So this is very important. The UNRWA has a $1.6 billion budget. When you raise funds in cash, you're supposed to give not only receipts, but a report about what happens to the cash. In the UNRWA budget, in the UNRWA website, unrwa.org, there's no mention of what happens to the cash, which is very suspicious. So this is something to mention when we're dealing with UNRWA, when we're dealing with peace, when we're dealing with accountability, we're dealing with transparency. These are issues which are basic, which are not being paid attention to by enough people. This is David Bedein, Behind the Scene with David Bedein.
The Askar refugee camp, located on the outskirts of Nablus, is one of 19 Palestinian refugee camps in Judea and Samaria, controlled and maintained by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which benefits from a whopping budget of $1.6 billion, flowing from 67 donor countries and 33 international NGOs. 58% of that budget funds the UNRWA school system, which emphasizes and promotes the right of return as the underlying principle for its operations, its very reason for being.
احنا تهجرنا من يافا واليوم جايين نحكي عن حقنا بالعودة وبنكافل لحد ما نرجع لأراضينا في يافا وأراضينا بحيفا والليل والرملة، إنه راح نرجع قريبا جدا. لو شو ما يصير مش راح يصير سلام. السلام بدناش إياه.
شو بيعلموكم عن حق العودة بالمدارس؟
ما احنا مشروع شهادة كلنا. واحنا لازم ندافع عن وطننا كتير. راح ناخذ حقنا والله ينتقم منهم ان شاء الله يموتوا كلهم. القدس عاصمة فلسطين وراح تضلها لنا ومش راح تتغير، راح تضلها لنا. المستوطنين اللي فيها كلهم راح ينتخوا.
يا توتة الدار صبرك عالزمان انجار، لابد ما نعود مهما طول المشوار، يابا 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 يابا.
وحابة أقول لكم إنه مفتاح العودة لساته معنا وراح نفتح يوم من الأيام في بيوتنا.
مثل إني بتعلم بجهدي وحق إني آخذ وطني ونحرر فلسطين، يعني الناس الشهداء يعني بيقدروا يحرروا فلسطين إذا بنضلهم هيك.
أنا نور المسيمة مديرة نادي أشبال العاصفة. إحنا كل سنة اللجنة الوطنية بتعمل نوادي صيفية في مخيم عسكر. قسمنا الأطفال ل4 مجموعات بأسماء شهدائنا في مخيم عسكر، أساسهم يضلوا حاضرين في ذهنهم وفي أفكارهم ويتعلموا منهم البطولة ويضلهم مستمرين في درب المقاومة. وفي عندهم يعني كل طفل مستعد يكون مشروع شهيد مقابل إنه يحافظ على المبادئ اللي إحنا مترسخة عنا، حقنا في العودة، وإن شاء الله انتفاضة أقوى جاية، وهدول أطفالنا هم اللي راح يقودوها.
The delusion of refugees going back to homes they left in the wake of the 1948 war, homes which are long gone, has turned into the source, the motivation, and the promoter of the armed rebellion against the Jews. Askar is the smallest of the refugee camps in Judea and Samaria, yet stands out as the camp with the highest amount of Palestinians engaged in terror activity in relation to the number of its inhabitants, including the highest number of shaheeds, armed terrorists killed in the act of murder, and the largest number of convicts serving life imprisonment for murder.
مخيم مقاتل، مخيم مقاوم، مخيم يقدم الشهيد تلو الشهيد، ومن جميع الأطياف ومن جميع الأعمار ومن جميع التوجهات.
From this refugee camp embarked the Palestinian assassin of brothers Hillel and Yagel Yaniv from Har Bracha, who were killed driving through Hawara in February 2023. It was also home to a 15-year-old terrorist who set out this past April from Askar, armed with a gun, shooting and severely injuring 2 Jews in Jerusalem. Askar is also home to the 3-man terrorist squad who, on April 7th, 2023, murdered Lucy D. and her 2 daughters, 15-year-old Reina and 20-year-old Maya, in a drive-by shooting. The perpetrators of these heinous killings are hailed today as heroes in the Askar refugee camp. As soon as the murder of this Jewish woman and her 2 young daughters became known, sweets were handed out on the streets of Askar as an expression of happiness and triumph. The funeral of Hassan Katanani, the terrorist who pulled the gun on the D family, grew into a huge rally of support, which consisted of everyone from the Askar refugee camp as they celebrated the murder of Jews and the destruction of Israel.
مين بطل المخيم؟
حسن القطراني.
ليه؟
سوى عملية لأنه أول شيء دافع عن وطنه وعن كرامته، رجع شوية من الكرامة لما هجرونا من ديورنا وبيوتنا وسيطروا على أراضينا.
مين هدول؟
إبراهيم النابلسي ووديع الحواح وعبد الله الحسري أحمد السعدي.
مين هدول؟
استشهد.
ايه؟
كل مخيم أبطال، في صالح صبرا وفي معاذ المصري وفي حسن القطناني وفي كتير شهداء عسكر. ونعطي لأخوتنا المقاومين نهديهم سلام والله يحمي كل واحد مقاوم. تحية لكتيبة عسكر وكتيبة جنين وكتيبة بلاطة. هذا عمي الله يرحمه استشهد 2022 28/10/2022.
وين استشهد وكيف استشهد؟
عملية على حشيش حوارة.
Posters with pictures of the killers were plastered in every corner of Askar, while songs of praise for the murderers were composed in their honor. Askar's UNRWA summer camps were even named for these murderers.
صورة البطل إبراهيم النابلسي لأنه كان مرعب، كان مش مطارد، كان يطارد. إني بحب إبراهيم لأنه يعني كان قدوة لكل شباب نابلس، كان قدوة لكل أطفال نابلس.
صورة الشهيد البطل عبد الله الحسري، أرعب كيان وغتم ومدمر وأسير وجريح وشهيد. أنا حبيته عشان كان مقاوم ودافع عن وطنه.
The family of Hassan Katanani was congratulated with pride and approval that their son had the honor to kill a Jewish woman and her 2 young daughters while driving in their car to meet family members during the Passover holiday. They expressed their hope and wish that the terrorist's young children would go in the footsteps of their father and merit to become holy shaheed, just like their blessed father. The terrorist's mother expressed herself in her own way.
احنا لازم نقتلهم في بلادنا، في عيالنا، في أظافرنا، ناكلهم بسناننا ناكلهم اليهود. هم أعدائنا بالأول والآخر اليهود.
الله يكرمني وأربيهم هالأولاد يطلعوا زي ما بده ربنا إن شاء الله. يكونوا من حفظة القرآن من الصالحين البارين إن شاء الله. مجاهدين في سبيل الله كمان. كنا بالنهاية على هالدرب يعني الجهاد واجب علينا. الحمد لله على كل حال.
Memorial ceremonies for holy martyrs and festivals celebrate the release of terrorists from prison at weddings and family celebrations accompanied by shooting rifles and pistols. Hundreds of Askar youth take part in these ceremonies, including children and young adolescents, absorbing the message of blind hatred so that they too can become the killers and shaheeds of the future. The amount of weapons in the Askar refugee camp are huge. Askar now boasts at least 200 wanted terrorists just waiting to commit the next acts of murder. This is how the right of return, the reason for being of UNRWA, has become a source of lethal violence that surpasses the organization's hollow slogans for peace. The time has come for donor nations to think again about blind support for UNRWA.